A huge thank you to patron Stephanie P for suggesting today's video topic. If you want to suggest a topic for next Wednesday's Name Explain video, all you have to do is support Name Explain on Patreon for $1 a month. Find out more by visiting patreon.com/NameExplain, which will be linked down below. Anyway, China, Japan, and the Korean Peninsula, which in modern times houses the two nations of North and South Korea, have had a long interconnected history of one another, as well as being pretty geographically close to one another too. In many cases, locations that have deep historical and geographic ties tend to have similarities in their languages, or even have languages that relate to one another. Take the Romance languages an example. They all come from the same root language of Latin, which formed on the Italian peninsula, and the nations that speak these languages like Italy, France, and Spain, all pretty close to one another. So is this the case with the languages of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean? They too are all close together and have a shared history, so it would make sense if they all came from the same language family, right? Well, in short, no. But also, yes, they do have one specific common bond which we'll get to. These three languages are from completely different language families. Take Chinese an example, and yes, I know Chinese isn't one language, is instead a collection of different languages and dialects which are similar but also slightly different, like Mandarin, Jin, and Wu. But there's a standard form called Standard Chinese, and for the sake of this video, we're going to refer to Chinese as a singular language. Anyway, Chinese comes from the Sino-Tibetan language family. This family also includes languages like Bai, spoken within China, and the Tamangic languages spoken in Nepal. Japanese is from the Japonic language family, which also includes the Ryukyu languages which are spoken on Japan's southern Ryukyu Islands, and Korean is part of the Koreanic language family, which also includes the Teju language spoken on Teju Island. So not only are they not related, they all come from relatively isolated language families. They are the largest languages of their respective families, with the other languages within it being spoken by much smaller groups of people. This is quite unlike other language families originating parts of Asia or Africa or Europe, where they have many widely spoken languages. But yes, they are from completely different language families. Japanese is just as closely related to Chinese or Korean as it is to German or Hungarian or Swahili, as they are not related at all. Though I ought to mention that there is a theory that the Japonic and Koreanic language families are part of a larger family called the Altaic language family, including other families like Turkic and Mongolic. Yet this idea is highly debated. Wikipedia even refers to it as highly controversial on their page right under its name. Man, you know it's got to be controversial for Wikipedia even saying it. I've never come across a controversial language family before. That could have a whole video unto itself, so remind me to do that at some point. Whatever the case, it seems odd that these languages aren't related at all because, well, look at them. These are signs from China, Japan, and South Korea, and they all look so similar. So how can they look so alike and not be related? Well, it's all because of that one thing they do actually have in common, that being a shared writing system. All three of these languages in their written form use a common writing system to varying degrees. That writing system being a collection of thousands of logographs. For those who might not know, a logograph is a written character that instead of representing a single sound, like the characters of the Latin script used in languages like English and French, they instead represent entire words or ideas. While used in all three languages, these characters have their ultimate origins in China with the Chinese language, and from here they were borrowed and used in Japanese and Korean. These characters don't have one name, they instead go by different names depending on what language they are being used in. In the language they originated from, Chinese, they're known as Hanzi, though I also heard it pronounced as Hanzi. They are also simply known as Chinese characters, but I'll be calling them Hanzi when talking about them in relation to Chinese. Hanzi in Chinese is super old. In fact, it is considered one of the oldest writing systems in the world. We have evidence of it in some form coming from over 8,000 years ago, with a more uniform version of it sprouting up around 3,000 years ago. We don't know how exactly it came into being, but one myth on its origins has a literal four-eyed historian Kanji inventing them. While the Chinese language and its writing system was being formed, so were the languages of Japanese and Korean. Yet for a variety of reasons, while these languages were being spoken in Japan and Korea, they didn't have a writing system. That might seem odd now, but many languages actually go some time without a means to write them down. This could be because the original speakers of a language had no means to write it down, or they simply just didn't need to. Though of course eventually Japanese and Korean would need some kind of writing system. But but instead of creating their own unique script, they simply borrowed and used the script which was being used in nearby China, which they had communication and relations with. Korean seemingly adopted these characters first between the 3rd and 4th century, while Japanese adopted them a tad later in the 5th century. This might sound odd, but languages sharing a script is fairly common. Think of all the languages that use the Latin script in their written form. In these other languages, these characters received new names. In Japanese, they're known as kanji, and in Korean, they're known as hanja. Despite the 3 different names of hanzi, kanji, and hanja, they are the same thing. The same characters written in the same way with the same meaning in each language. Take this character an example. It simply means fire. A Chinese speaker, a Japanese speaker, and a Korean speaker will all know that this symbol means fire in their hanji, kanji, and hanja respectively. But while they know it means fire in their respective languages, how they would actually say their word for fire out loud is different. If being read aloud in Chinese hanji, it will be pronounced as ho, while if being read aloud in Japanese kanji, it will be pronounced as hi, and if being read aloud in Korean hanja, it will be pronounced as hwa. Granted, they all sound a little similar and my terrible pronunciation probably isn't helping, but you can hear there is a difference. This difference in the way these symbols sound in different languages is because, as mentioned, they are logographs. These symbols do not reflect sounds like the symbols of the Latin alphabet. Take this symbol an example. If you see this symbol in a word of English, French, or German, most of the time it's going to be pronounced in the same way, making a p sound. Logographs, however, aren't bound to a specific sound when being spoken out loud. They just reflect a meaning or a word, and different languages can relate their word for the symbol's meaning onto it, regardless of if it sounds similar to how other languages might say that symbol out loud. When this symbol was created in China, they applied their word of fire to it. Japanese and Korean, however, would have already had words for fire in their languages, just no way to write it down. So when they borrowed these characters from China, they simply applied their already established words for fire to the symbol, which meant fire in the Chinese language. Yeah, the relationship between these languages is really quite surface level. And while they may all use these characters, how often they use them vary greatly. In Chinese, Hanzi is the only writing system. Chinese has no phonetic alphabet or script, meaning they have no symbols that represent specific sounds in their written language. I guess the closest they have is pinyin, which is used to transliterate Chinese words into the Latin script. This means that Hanzi is used exclusively for all written language needs. This means Chinese people have to know an awful lot of symbols to get by with reading. One source says an educated Chinese person will know around 8,000 characters of Hanzi, but for day-to-day use, they only really need to know between 2,000 and 3,000, which is an awful lot more than the 26 letters of the Latin script. In Japanese, however, kanji is used quite a lot, but not exclusively. It is instead intermixed with Japanese not one, but 2 other writing systems, hiragana and katakana. These are 2 syllabaries of Japanese, meaning they are symbols that match up with sounds. Hiragana is used for native Japanese words, while katakana is used for foreign words brought into Japanese. Both these symbol systems actually derive from the Chinese characters too, aka Hanzi. Hiragana is actually an adaptation of something called manyogana. This was when Hanzi characters were first used in Japanese in the mid-7th century, but slightly adapted to present sounds instead of single meanings. This eventually evolved into modern-day hiragana. Katakana was created more directly from Chinese Hanzi in the 9th century. The 3 writing systems that Japanese implements is something we've talked about quite a bit in various videos in the past. In Korean, however, hanja is hardly used at all in this day and age seemingly. It is apparently still taught and understood, but it's very much on the way out of fashion. What is instead used way more often in Korean is Hangul. This is a phonetic alphabet exclusive to Korean, which features symbols that represent sounds. Hangul has a really interesting story behind it. For the longest time, Hanja was the main writing system of Korean, yet it was only used by the higher-ups and elite of society. In the 15th century, however, King Sejong of Korea wanted this to change. He wanted the masses to be able to read and write in Korean, not just the upper crust. So he decreed that a new writing system should be made, one that's easy enough for anyone to be able to learn, and this eventually became Hangul. This alphabet only has 10 vowels and 14 consonants, and is seemingly one of the easier languages to learn, all because the king wanted people to be able to read and write. How nice of him. Yet, even after the creation of Hangul, Hanja was still seen as the go-to writing system for the affluent, with Hangul for the peasants. I guess the joke is on them now, as Hanja is on the way out in the land and Hangul is seemingly here to stay. What this all means, however, is that Chinese, Japanese and Korean aren't related or sibling languages. It's more like Chinese is the cool older kid who gave the younger kids of Japanese and Korean a neat toy or something to borrow, but they never gave it back. There is, however, a third younger kid in this analogy as well, as one other language uses these characters in their written form too, that being the language of Vietnamese. Yep, these characters can even be seen in the language of Vietnam too, and once again they have their own unique name in the language, that being Chu Han. So the question shouldn't be a Chinese, Japanese and Korean related, it should instead be a Chinese, Japanese, Korean and Vietnamese related. And the answer to that question is still a resounding no. Vietnamese is part of the Austro-Asiatic language family. It's not Sino-Tibetan, Japonic or Koreanic. It just happens to use these logographs too. Name Explained depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explained videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/NameExplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm Name Explain YT and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and once again, thank you all so much.